So my biggest interview tip is, if you're a top performer or a top leader and you've been in your career for over 8-10 years, more than that, there's a good chance that your interview skills or the way you talk about yourself is a bit atrophied. You want to think back as when we're at that stage in our career, we're usually an automatic pilot. We see a problem, we know how to solve it. We're a leader, we know how to build a team. We know exactly what needs to happen. But somewhere like Amazon, they're going to ask you, well, how did you do that? What was your strategy? What was your methodology? What was your mechanism? The problem-solving fundamentals that you use to solve that problem. And most people stumble. They don't remember what it is, even if they created that strategy or methodology. So what I would say is we need to know our own stories in our bones. That's our biggest thing. And almost, most of the candidates I work with, no matter what their level, they have this problem the longer they're in their career. So bring that automatic pilot place to the forefront. Really learn your own mechanisms, your own methodologies, your own strategies. I know I created a methodology that I implemented at Google. Someone asked me about that in an interview and I couldn't remember it. I still did it daily, but I couldn't remember the 10 bullet points of my own methodology, my own strategy. That was when I started to realize it's not that I don't know how to do it. It's not that I'm not a top performer at doing this. I don't know how to talk about my own story. And if you've been promoted, you need to create an interview strategy and go talk to the people who've promoted you in your career, because you're used to walking in a room and everybody knowing, oh, she's amazing. Well, let's have her build all our technology. Let's have him build out our leadership team. And you're not used to talking about yourself. These are those things where it's such a simple concept. We need to know our own stories and our bones, and we need to think about how are the methodologies, the processes, the mechanisms, and all of us have it much more than we realize, and create that language for ourselves. Before we ever interview, before we really, even as a manager, being able to help our teams know how to work with us as well, we need to have that language of who we are and how we work and what's our best way, what are those tools and methodologies that we use to do that. If you come through our interviewing process, you're going to first and foremost need to know your own story in your bones. You need to really bring that automatic pilot place that you make decisions and that what you've done that makes you good at what you do. Learn your own story, bring it to the surface. And one of the exercises that we suggest in our LEAP program is you take the 16 leadership principles and you write out 2 stories for each leadership principle. Where did you solve a business problem and where did you solve a functional or technical problem in your area of expertise? That'll be kind of the job description. Each of those 2 stories, you might have an overarching leadership principle that sort of highlights kind of maybe customer obsession or one of those leadership principles. But you also want to have another additional 2 to 5 leadership principles that are sort of embedded in that. So I'm one of those people who has lots of ownership and bias for action for everything I do. So that pretty much is, those are leadership principles that are in almost all my stories, just because that's kind of who I am. So all of us will have multiple leadership principles if we've really fleshed out that story. And then in those 2 stories for each leadership principle, we also want to flesh out methodologies, processes, mechanisms. Did we increase revenue 20% year over year? Did we help our customer? Did we help future customers? Did we help our team? Did we help other teams? Did we help the company? Knowing through those things. And that's how you flush all that out with what we call the STAR method. And that's the situation, task, action, result. And in most companies, you're going to kind of do a high level view. That's not how we do things here. You really want to dive deep and go very complex with what your answers are in that STAR method. And you really want to show the data and the results through that and flush that out. But ironically, you have to do it quickly and concisely. So your STAR method should really be about 3 to 5 minutes at most, with follow-up questions, which are about another 5 to 7 minutes. So in total, most of the behavioral questions that you're asked are going to say, tell me about a time you did such and such. You're going to answer in that STAR method for 3 to 5 minutes. And then they're going to say, oh, well, tell me more. What about this? What about that? With another 5 to 7 minutes. So total, you're really going to have 10 to 12 minutes is where the meat of your story is. And then they'll be moving on to the next behavioral question or functional question that they have assigned to them. Tips for interviewing here at Amazon. So now all of Amazon and AWS have a similar formula of how we interview. Now, each of you are going to have different roles you're interviewing for, and you'll have different recruiters, a team of recruiters you're working with, and there'll be nuances about what that particular team specifies for their role. But overall, most teams, you do either 1 or 2 business phone interviews. If you pass that, you qualify for what we call an on-site interview. Now, since the pandemic, all of our on-sites are virtual, and There are some cases where that's not the case, so work with your recruiters. But all of our on-sites, you're then assigned 5 to 6 interviewers. Those 5 to 6 interviewers are assigned 2 leadership principle questions as well as a functional question. So pretty much most of your interviewers are going to have 3 or 4 questions that they have taken from a bank of questions that are assigned to those leadership principle questions or those functional questions. That means that you need to have 3 to 4 stories for each interviewer, and you can't use the same story for each of your interviewers. And all 5 or 6 of those interviewers are going to go back to what's called a debrief. And in that debrief, they're all going to tell the 3 or 4 stories you told them, and they're all going to go around and vote whether you're going to move forward with an offer or not. So you really want to have advocacy for yourself in the interviewing process. Make sure that those interviewers get all their questions answered and that they can go back to that debrief and vote for you in the direction you would like that. So part of how you want to think through that is they're going to ask you, let's say, those 3 questions. You've got about 30 to 40 minutes total that you have those 3 or 4 questions asked of you. Most of them will be behavioral. Even if you were doing a technical interview, some of those technical interviews can still be behavioral in nature. So you really want to be prepared, and you answer with the first STAR method by about 3 to 5 minutes. And then you answer follow-up questions with, when they dive a little bit deeper into that story, you'll have another 5 to 7 minutes. That gives you 11 minutes. That's pretty much the formula. And then in that last 5 minutes, you want to make sure that you're asking, do they have any questions about their stories? So they can go back to that debrief and vote for you on your behalf. Make sure you're always answering the STAR method. Make sure you're always leading with data. Make sure you really have fleshed out at least 2 stories for each of the leadership principles. Make sure you're hydrated, eat snacks, make sure you take really good care of yourself, because our interviews are very intense, and we really want you to show us how you do the leadership principles. No matter what, everybody, no matter whether you're a leader or not, everybody gets asked the leadership principle behavioral questions. So be prepared for that and know how to talk about your own stories through that lens. And then the rest is have fun. Be your authentic self. There's nothing that's more important than that. All of us have a job that we do that we're good at, but we also have all these intersectional areas of our life. Make sure you're bringing that too. That will influence who you are and how you do what you do. Tell that story too. It's important to bring your full self. We really want to see that, because those are the types of people who can solve problems that haven't been solved on a global scale. So we all think of diversity as, maybe our gender or ethnicity, but diversity also is all the other places that our life intersects with what we do for our day job. So most of us are interviewing for a particular role, or we fit in a particular job family, but we also all intersect in an area, around language, our culture, our geography, our schools, our regions. There's a million different intersectional points that influence what we do in our day job. And those are influencing how we do what we do. And they're also influencing the kinds of problems that we need to solve in the world. Make sure you're bringing that story to who you are in your stories and your interviews. What's really cool is the world's changing now. We really want to actually see all the pieces that influence who you are and what you do, because we have customers who need that voice. So make sure you're bringing that. So for me, I'm the founder of a nonprofit outside of Amazon. I've been doing it for 16 years. I help impoverished women have babies safely in sub-Saharan Africa who live under $1.25 a day. And I have built that health center. I do that, in my spare time. And that intersectionality of my skill set helps me actually realize I really like to empower people, give them the tools to help advocate for themselves in whatever conditions. Now, Amazon's cool enough to let me bring that intersectionality of my skill set, that part of my personality, to come solve a problem that hadn't been solved in my skill set. Make sure you're doing that. Make sure you're telling your story in a way that shows that we can give you the keys to come solve a problem that hasn't been solved before, with all the areas that maybe you fit in this job family, but you also actually influence all these other areas. Bring that story. That's what we want to hear. So come to tell your story, and let's hear what you can do to come solve a problem that hasn't been solved before.